Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Well, I've been talking about it for a couple of weeks. We are entering a new phase here at Political Spirits. On some episodes, we'll present interviews and conversations with cultural and political figures and commentators, and this week will be the first. We have on the phone Christian Toto, film reviewer and podcaster extraordinaire. He's the founder and host of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, and you can find him at hollywoodintoto.com. That site, incidentally, includes an archive of his years of film reviews, so it's a great resource when you're thinking about watching a movie at home. Christian, thank you for joining us. You know, I've been wanting to have you on the show for a long time, but I've had technical phone issues, recording issues that have held us up, and those are finally resolved. And I haven't mentioned this to you, but one of the main reasons I really want to talk to you is that you're part of a rare and valuable demographic, conservative film reviewers. I don't know if you're familiar with the endangered species, the Florida panther, but I think there are more Florida panthers than there are conservative film reviewers. There's a road sign on the side of the exit to Naples, Florida that says Panther Traffic. And one thing I'm pretty sure of is that you're never going to see a road sign that says Conservative Film Reviewer Traffic. So with that odd introduction, Christian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And by the way, I always mention that you could take all the conservative movie critics, put them in a clown car, and you'd have lots of leg room left over.
So tell me, how long have you been reviewing movies?
You know, I started back at Pittsburgh. I was working at a Pittsburgh newspaper, and whenever the main critic went on vacation, maybe twice a year, I would kind of jump up and down and wave my hands and say, ooh, me, can I do this? So I got like a taste of it there. That's like over 20 years ago.
Wow.
And then when I went to a paper in Washington, D.C., the Washington Times, I basically kind of elbowed my way gently into the gig and then became sort of one of the full-time critics there. So it's been a while. And, I confess when I started, I was sort of a quote unquote straight news critic. I wasn't really looking at things from the left or the right. I was just reviewing movies. And in a way, in a perfect world, I'd continue to do that. But, Hollywood has changed dramatically. And I think that my fellow critics have changed dramatically where they see things from a very specific lens.
Yep.
And I'm just sort of, in a way, returning the favor.
So you've changed a little bit in your approach. Do you think the nature of your actual review of the movie, not the commentary, which I understand now has a conservative tint to it, but your opinions about the films, were they different before you decided to consciously take a conservative reviewer perspective and commentary, or were they basically the same thing, you just wouldn't make the express political references?
I think they're pretty similar. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't like to get into theory. I don't get in my head. It's just, is the movie entertaining? Do I think other people will enjoy it? And that's what any critic should be doing, left, right, or center. That's ultimately the goal. If I see a liberal movie that's good, I'm going to give it a very good review. I'll mention the politics. I'll mention the angle. But I always mention, at least in recent times, I've mentioned the movie Booksmart. Oh my gosh, it's the most woke movie you could possibly imagine. But it was funny and it was sharp and the actors did a good job. And I thought the direction was interesting and novel. I can't give that movie a negative review because it's woke. I mean, the woke stuff annoys me. I get it. I see it. But I have to be honest about it.
Yeah, I have very much the same view. It's kind of I look at film the same way as I look at thinking about the humor of your own country. I remember a few years ago I spent some time in Australia, actually on an assignment for the company I was working for, and I used to love humor about America. I remember somebody making fun of our food here, and he said he ordered a sandwich and it was held together by a knitting needle. You know, I mean, he was making fun of the size of it, and I appreciate that. I mean, I think everyone should have a sense of humor about their country. I think everyone should have a sense of humor about their political beliefs too. If something's funny, it's funny, regardless of whether it's on the left or the right.
I agree. I mean, I think that kind of connects to the late night TV team. Listen, they're all left of center. I get that, but I don't think their comedy is very funny these days.
Yeah, I don't think
It
it's
seems
even
kind of
comedy.
yeah. I mean, I think it's mean spirited. I think that
Yeah.
really saps a lot of the humor away. But I also think it's lazy. It's kind of sad. But I think that often in our times, the ideology, the passion, the fervor, the fever, even,
Yep.
I think it kind of swamps the creative element. I think we're seeing that on late night TV.
Well, and I think some of what's happened with Hollywood on late night TV, the same thing you encounter with cable news. I've talked on the podcast about the fact that it's an absolute shame the direction that CNN chose to go. They could have been the entity that strove for the middle and would play it straight down the line, and people from the left and the right would go to CNN for an opportunity for a more nuanced, actually balanced, ironically, presentation from the center. And that would give them the opportunity to have an even larger audience because they would be pulling from both groups. Instead, they went hard to the left, anti-Trump, and then basically split the audience with MSNBC, and they're the lesser of the two, in large part because they're dishonest about what they are, whereas MSNBC sort of comes right out and says what they are. And so CNN sort of played it easy, just as Hollywood seems to be playing it easy. They put out all these woke films. They redo a movie with a female cast and think that's creativity.
Interesting note. I think his name is Alan Estrin. He's the producer on Dennis Prager. And bear with me, this is going to connect to what we're talking about.
Okay.
He was talking at a recent podcast about how he was a screenwriter in Hollywood. And back in the day, it was all about money. Will your screenplay make money? Is that script successful? And he said after a while, when he was in Hollywood, that changed a bit. I mean, they still wanted money. They wanted to be successful, but it started to evolve into, well, we need to send a message. It's not just about the money. It's about the ideology. And you think about the money that a CNN is losing by saying, well, we want to go into the fever swamps to the left where we could have went straight and at the competition. CNN, I think, had an opportunity, a sort of a valuable economic opportunity to be straight, to be balanced, to be fair. And I think they said, well, we'd rather go in this direction, even if it means losing ratings, losing money. And I think that's what's going on sort of in the greater entertainment realm, where it isn't just about the dollars and cents. Think about late night TV. If you had one competent late night host who was right of center, I think he or she would kill, absolutely kill.
I do too.
But they would rather make less money and have the messages that they want out there, and more importantly, the messages they don't want out there, out of the public conversation. So they're making a choice. You don't think they could make one late night talk show that would be right of center? I think they'd be very successful.
And what you're pointing out is something that has really troubled me for quite some time, but I'm seeing even more evidence of this lately. I've seen articles from financial magazines talking about how the companies that have a more, they don't label it progressive agenda, but that's what they're talking about. The ecological commitments, for example, the social cultural commitments to diversity, et cetera. I'm not arguing that individual instances of those are a good or a bad idea. What I'm saying is that they're saying that those companies, that's the success that people are pointing to in the future. What is the point of investing in a company if it doesn't provide a financial return to you? It's bizarre. It's as if people are sort of wanting to replace the currency with virtue signaling check boxes.
Look at the Super Bowl. They recently, many companies spent literally millions of dollars to put their ads up, and some of those ads were about virtue signaling. I'm thinking, you could associate your brand with hard work, dedication, patriotism, things that have value across the spectrum. But what you're doing is sending millions of dollars down the tube to do some woke gesturing. Now, the woke crowd may like that, but I think it's a very small crowd. And I think it's also a very fickle crowd that doesn't have a lot of loyalty. Because if you're a company and you do 9 advertising campaigns that are very woke, and then your 10th one is problematic, then all the good work you've done is gone. Look at J.K. Rowling, who's been a very
Yeah.
sort of a stalwart progressive hero. She made one wrong turn, so to speak, and all of a sudden she's, the enemy to the left. So it seems like it's not a very pragmatic approach, I don't think.
It's not, but and what's odd and in some respects even more offensive because of the hypocrisy of it all, when that happens to somebody, if they go hard left in their positions, they can actually get the media and the activists to forget what they did. I mean, look at the governor of Virginia, for example. I mean, he's apparently been forgiven for being either a person in blackface or a person in a Klan robe in a school photo, because now he's going hard left against guns and the Second Amendment. Well, okay, that's enough for us to forgive. It's like he's basically through policy buying a papal indulgence. It's bizarre.
Yeah, and I think when you get into the strictly political venue, that's more possible. But I just don't know if I'm a brand, why I would put so much effort and money into certain campaigns that you would think that you want to see the bigger picture. I mean, I would think these companies care about what's going to be happening in 5 years and 10 years and building brand loyalty. And I would think that'd be far more important. I mean, an investment in a Super Bowl ad is monumental. I don't care what the company is. Maybe a Coke or Pepsi can sweat those losses if it doesn't go well, but it is fascinating to watch.
Well, let's transition that into something where you are far more knowledgeable than me, and that is the movie making process. I have said for years I don't understand what Hollywood is doing. How do all of these woke films, the anti-Iraq war movies, for example, there was a string of one after another that would be critically acclaimed, win awards, and have horrendous box office. I mean, those things, investors have to fund that. Are the investors actually looking at it more like making a political donation as opposed to actually expecting a return? How can you explain Hollywood continually doing that?
Well, I think I hinted at this with that Prager producer and what he was watching happening within the industry. Think about a movie like Bombshell. No, it did not
Yeah.
do well at the box office. It got some award season love for sure. But that movie is going to live on. It's going to be on Netflix, perhaps, or Amazon Prime or Hulu. You'll see it on HBO. It'll be bouncing around cable and different, wherever we're watching, movies in
Yeah.
10, 20 years for a long, long time. So even though its short-term success was nil, it's going to live on, and those messages will live on. And when people watch them, the particular movie, they'll say, "Well, those Fox News people, they hate gay people, and they're racists, and they promote hate because those are the messages in the movie." So I think on some level, the powers that be in Hollywood are willing to make that sacrifice, and maybe they've got money coming in from another project. Maybe there's a Bond franchise or a Fast and Furious franchise where they'll make all the money they need there. And if they take a loss on this particular project, well, that's just the price you pay to kind of get involved in the culture wars.
So what you're saying, it actually bothers me the same way it bothers me when corporations seem more focused on virtue signaling than actually producing a return for their investors. It seems like what's going on is that Hollywood is making a conscious effort to have a political impact instead of focusing on a return for the investors. Don't they have to fight with investors over that, or are the investors all of the same political ilk?
Well, I don't think they see it like we see it. I think they put out a movie like Bombshell thinking it could be successful. But also, I'm going to guess that if you're a studio and you can kind of line up your success stories and look at your investors and say, "Hey, this kind of justifies our approach," or maybe the people who are throwing the money at these things are on the same team, so to speak, where they say,
Yeah.
"Hey, we know this is a pretty risky venture, but it's worth it." And also, some of these projects get award season love, Emmys and Oscars and Golden Globes, and maybe that sort of balances the ledger where they can bring some notoriety and fame and prestige to the studio or to the network, and that compensates for the lack of economic results.
And then you have the equal and opposite effect that if they make a conservative film, they're fearful that they won't get the awards, they won't get the love from the Academy or whichever group, and so it could have a negative effect on the prestige of their studio.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole new world, and ideology really does come into play. And you can think about it with this is one of my favorite examples, and it seems so obvious. You're an actor, you've just made a movie, you're doing a whole bunch of publicity to promote the movie. And I'm sure it's exhausting. I've met these actors, they'll do, 10, 20, 30 interviews in a day, back to back to back to back.
Wow.
All they're doing is promoting their movie because they want you to see it, and it makes complete sense. They've given away 3 months of their time. They've given a lot of their, effort and attention. They want you to see the movie. They want it to be
Yeah.
successful. And then they go out on the publicity tour and they say Trump is evil or wrong, or they bash this or bad, thinking you're doing the opposite. If you're trying to promote your movie, why would you even go in that direction? You may hate Trump, and that's fine. But why would you say it? Why would you say it knowing there's
Yeah.
someone out there who's on the fence about your movie and they like Trump or they like whatever you're bashing? They say, "Oh, I'm going to stay home." I mean, that is what's happening. And is it a grand scale? I don't know. It's hard to measure. But why would you do that?
And they've ramped it up to 11, I guess, in the reference to an old Rob Reiner movie, ironically,
Mhm.
in that they now attack those who support Trump.
Oh, yeah.
That's incredible. It's not just that they're saying something that would offend potential viewers. They literally are attacking the potential moviegoers.
Yeah. And there is a caveat here where because the landscape is so splintered, they can partially get away with that. If you're Stephen Colbert on the Late Show, you don't need to draw Johnny Carson sized numbers. That's no longer possible.
Yeah.
It's no longer practical. But if you have a devoted left of center following, that'll be enough to survive
Yes.
and even thrive. So in some ways I get it. But if you're a movie, if you're an actor, the sort of the economics of a movie, they can be different. If it's a blockbuster movie, Ghostbusters a couple of years ago was a failure. It made around $100 million, which is technically a great amount of money, but because the costs were so high, the marketing was so high, the advertising, it needed a broader audience. And I think a lot of their messaging was, this is for women. If you don't like this, you're anti-women.
Yeah.
So I think on that scale, they make a big mistake. So it doesn't, some actors can get away with the bashing, but, if you're Robert De Niro and you've got The Irishman coming, well, it's a major film and it's Scorsese and it's got Pesci and Pacino, you're kind of bulletproof. But if you're Robert De Niro and you're going out to promote your little film that needs all the attention it can get, and you're bashing Trump 24/7, I think he's really hurting that movie's box office potential.
Yeah. Tell me something. To what extent are there actually conservative stars and directors in Hollywood, with the exception of Clint Eastwood, Vince Vaughn, and maybe Mark Wahlberg? I mean, we know them, but are there others, and are they just staying underground for fear of the impact on their careers?
I'm sure there are others. I've spoken to others. I've spoken to people who prefer I don't mention their names because they feel the retribution. Yeah, listen, you look at the Black community; it votes overwhelmingly for Democrats.
Yep.
But there's 8, 9, 10% that vote Republican. Same with Hollywood. Hollywood is left of center. Most people in the industry are, but there's always going to be people who are center right or right. Look at Nick Searcy. He's one of the most outspoken fellows you'll ever meet. A pretty outrageously funny guy too. So they're out there, but listen, they understand what's going on. They understand that if they're not a Jon Voight or a major actor with clout and gravitas and a resume, that it could hurt their potential. I mean, every actor fears not getting the next gig. It's a very brutal business. I remember talking years ago to William H. Macy, and the way he talked to me about it was he doesn't know where his next gig is coming from. And this was a guy who works constantly, is a great character actor, and I think he'll be going till he's 90. But every actor is afraid of not getting the next role, of becoming sort of out of the loop, of kind of losing their cool or hip or cachet. And it's understandable because it's a very competitive, cutthroat business. So if you're an actor and you're right of center and we're living in Trump times, would you speak up?
So to get actual more conservative movies made, does there need to be a movie studio acquisition or a startup by a conservative personality? I know the thing that conservatives have been actually sort of lusting for from a media perspective is for Peter Thiel to get into media production. He's a billionaire conservative that is prominent, well-spoken, and, tremendous business acumen. Is it going to take something like that, or is there any chance that Trump's re-election might cause the studios to say, look, all right, we fought with him tooth and nail. Maybe we can try to find some slightly less extreme middle ground to exist with him?
Well, I would wish that would be the case. I don't think it's going to happen if Trump is reelected.
Yeah.
I think they'll double and triple down. But you're right. I mean, I think a lot of conservatives, like an Andrew Klavan type, who is a screenwriter, is a creator, is a podcaster. He's been begging for that kind of uh, structure within the industry, where there is a studio that is friendly to right of center causes and stories and messages, and they start creating movies of consequence. I mean, what we've seen in recent years is no safe spaces, which sadly is center right, because people on the right now support free speech far more. The movies that we are seeing that are right of center are most often independent films that either use crowdfunding or kind of work around the system. We're not seeing a Paramount Pictures movie that is, for fracking, for example.
Yes.
Like, that doesn't exist. And so there's no one out, there's no structure where an actor can say, I've got this idea for a center right story, or I'm going to tell the story of Venezuela and what happened. They can't go anywhere. They've got to go independent.
So if there were a sort of a large movie studio with a conservative bent, what are some films that you would like to see made that, as Hollywood is currently structured, will likely never be made?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of good stories to be told that aren't being told. You could talk about how capitalism rises people up out of poverty. Maybe there's mini stories within that sort of grand picture. I mentioned Venezuela before. What about people who have been hurt and killed by illegal immigration? People who were, deported 5 times. They kept coming back into the country. The lax laws made it possible. And all of a sudden they rape and murder someone. I mean, and maybe we follow that family and how a lot of dramatic potential there. That's a story that will never, ever be told in Hollywood circles right now. Never. So you have to go around it, so that's what we're looking at.
The movie that I've always wanted to be made, and I don't think it ever will be, is something that really delves into the horrors of communism, that takes the stories of the people who were essentially enslaved in the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, who were fighting to get out, and take the stories of individuals who endured those oppressions and then managed to escape across the border to the West and end up in, for example, Western Europe or the U.S., and then explore the inspiring successes of their descendants. She's either a one-star general or a colonel. I can't remember what branch of the Air Force, what segment of the Air Force she's in. It might have been intelligence that gave the commencement address at one of my daughter's high school graduations. And she talked about that she was a descendant of parents who escaped across the border from the Soviet Union. And those sorts of inspiring stories would make an incredible sort of mini-series or film series where you could show the degradation, essentially the imprisonment in the Soviet Union of the ancestors, and then the inspiring success of their descendants in the U.S. as a way of showing the obvious differences that I think in much of America we've lost sight of that.
It's a great example, and of course it would be compelling. Another quick point about this: even when we get those stories, we don't always get those stories. And I mentioned the HBO production of Chernobyl from, I guess it was late last year.
Yep.
It was interesting because I think a lot of conservatives drew some pretty obvious lessons from that about the state and the system, and the rest.
Yeah.
But when you talk to the people who made the movie, when they talk to the press, they say, well, this is about Trump and this is about how he's a totalitarian. I mean, even when these stories are told, the people telling them don't even get the real message there. I mean, that fascinates me too. And so Listen, I guess the audience can make up their minds, but it's so fascinating. Just the framing of it seems so dishonest and tacky, and completely missing the point. I mean, it's what happened. The Trump derangement's real, but even when we get the stories that we're craving, it doesn't even happen the way we want it to happen.
Yeah, it's kind of funny as you bring that up. It reminds me that it really connects with the sort of the driving motive, sort of the mission statement of my podcast, Political Spirits. We talk about how the left and right need to have a few drinks and talk. No need to compromise. We just need to talk. And the reason I say that is because we as Americans need to understand what our fellow Americans think. And we shouldn't lose a friend or be ostracized at work just because we told our fellow Americans what we believe politically. And the fact that movies like that can be made where the writers and producers and directors have no idea that they're actually delivering a conservative message because they misunderstand the message that much. They misunderstand conservatism. That just cries out for more conversations between citizens, basically. And what's happening where if you don't say exactly the politically correct thing, you get ostracized, that prevents those conversations from happening. And film could and should be something that spurs those conversations rather than suppresses them.
I think when we look back, I hope this is the case because I think history needs this. When we look back at this era in Hollywood, I think people will be ashamed of Hollywood. Now, Hollywood has been obsessed for years with the blacklist, the 1950s blacklist, and
Yep.
for understandable reasons. I don't go through the whole history. But what we're seeing here is sort of a soft, unspoken blacklist against not just conservatism in Hollywood, but sort of conservative thought and ideas, and a complete bubble mentality where the people behind Chernobyl didn't even realize what the messages that history is telling us. It's fascinating and it's sad, and I just wish that Hollywood would put aside its sort of partisan blinders and say, hey, we may not agree with conservatives on any issue, but we certainly agree with their right to say it, to speak it, to
Yeah.
discuss it, to share it, and that voice has been almost completely silent in Hollywood, and what a shame that is.
Well, speaking of shames, let's transition to another issue where there's sort of a bubble mentality and hypocrisy, ad infinitum. The Me Too movement as it relates to Hollywood practices. It struck me when all of these allegations started to come out and then some of them started to be proven, that it made me wonder, is in essence Hollywood an industry that existed or was sort of driven not by currency or in addition to currency, by investors trying to get access to incredibly beautiful young starlets, male and female, as sort of a side benefit. I'll put this money in, and by the same token, I'll encounter lots of these rising stars who are among the most beautiful people in the world, and I may be able to get something out of that. Is that, in essence, part of sort of the currency of the realm historically in Hollywood?
It's certainly a significant element. I mean, I think those factors are across the board in business, any kind of business. It's certainly more pronounced in Hollywood, where the jobs are scarce,
Yeah.
where the beauty is off the charts, where power is super important, and egos are fragile. I mean, it's a perfect storm. It's funny when the Weinstein scandal broke. One of my first thoughts was, well, Hollywood can't wag its finger anymore because there's a significant problem across the board behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Anything, they've got to kind of fix, get their house in order first before telling us about climate change or whatever. And they just went right on with their messaging, ignoring the fact that they've got significant issues. And you could say the same about the gender imbalance in Hollywood, racial issues in Hollywood. They keep saying there's systemic racism in Hollywood, yet these stars and directors keep telling Trump voters they're racist. Well,
Yeah.
look at yourself. I mean, don't you have any self-awareness? They don't. And it's why we take them less and less seriously.
It sort of reminds me of the old the Dr. Jordan Peterson phrase, clean your room. Well, Hollywood needs to clean its own room before they start lecturing to us about what we need to do.
Yeah, and when I see, I think part of my frustration with Hollywood and its messaging and the lectures is that it's often not very smart. Look at Taylor Swift, who's had an awakening, and she's woke and
Yeah.
progressive. Well, great, but do you hear her speak? It's just platitudes. It's Republicans are racist and homophobic. Who benefits from that? How is that smart or enlightened or thoughtful? I mean, it's puddle deep. And so, great, she's got power, and great, she's got a microphone, and great, she's a great singer. I just saying that has wonderful talent, but nothing she's saying from the political perspective is enlightening or helpful, or there's nothing we can gain from it. It's more finger wagging. It's more hateful. It's more it's just not interesting. So why do I care what she thinks because she's famous? If listen, I think an Angelina Jolie is a pretty good example of someone who's actually articulate on the issues and goes to
Yes.
different countries and does the legwork and makes change. And I'll respect her even if I don't agree with her. But most stars, they're just not that well thought out, and I don't care what they have to say.
So what's the line from the Taylor Swift song? Got nothing in my brain. That's what people say. Mm-hmm. If I could sing, I would do it. Maybe that was a little more self-reflective than she realized.
Yeah, listen, if Taylor Swift came out tomorrow and said, I've had a 2.0 reawakening, and I'm pro-life, and I think that President Trump, for all his flaws, is doing wonderful things, the culture in the media would turn on her so
Yeah.
savagely, she would probably be in therapy the next day, and I wouldn't blame her.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think you're
So,
absolutely right. Christian, this has been incredibly interesting. I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you've been wanting to you've been wanting to bring up?
well, I say this a lot. I sound like a broken record, but I think that conservatives have to support right of center art. When No Safe Spaces is in a theater
Yes.
near you, go see it, bring a friend. When Created Equal, Clarence Thomas, in his own words, is playing somewhere, go make the drive, make the effort, buy the ticket. If you don't support this kind of art, this kind of messaging, you'll get even less of it if that's possible.
I agree with you 100%. And in light of that, too, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk for a moment about your podcast, your website, and what people can find there.
Well, my home base is hollywoodintoto.com. It's updated pretty much every day, sometimes multiple times a day. My podcast is the Hollywood in Toto podcast. That's a weekly show. It's interview based, but I have some monologues, some tips on social media. And you can follow me on Twitter at Hollywood in Toto.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Christian. It's been great talking with you.
Same here. Have me on again, please.
All right. Thank you. All right. Talk to you later. Well, that was a lot of fun. There will be more great interviews to come, not every week, but they'll be a regular feature of Political Spirits. Be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits and like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits, and follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And we're on Instagram now as well at Political Spirits. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube also. And the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell and select all after you hit the bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.